Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of You Can't Do That Anymore, a new movie podcast about looking back at classic movies, movies we love, movies we hold dear, that probably are not perfect. They might be a little problematic. They might have some things that haven't aged well. They might have things that weren't appropriate at the time they were made. And we're going to go in and we're going to find it and have a pretty good discussion of what those movies are, why they were important at the time, why they're important today, how maybe we could have cleaned it up, and whether or not we still love these movies despite their flaws. This isn't about just throwing everything away. It's more about understanding what was and how to do better moving forward. I am your host, Blake Schultz, and with me are my co-hosts, Terrence Tatum.
Hello.
And Anastasia Washington.
Hi, guys. What was that?
That was perfect. It was beautiful. It was music is what it was. You probably know Terrence and I from our other movie podcast, Hollywood Already Did It, about reboots, remakes, and sequels, that in the time of COVID has come to a weird stop because no one knows when movies come out. I also do another one called How Do You Figure? You might come from there, where we're talking about collectibles. And you know Anastasia from our third podcast, One More Drink, our comedic show that changes topics all the time. Right now, it's about our various first times. She also does Hysterical and Serial Killer, two great podcasts about history, and one pairing serial killers and cereal breakfasts together only the way you can. Right. And that's how we're going to start this off. I'm so glad you're all here and willing to see what fun things we used to love. We're going to start this podcast off with a movie that kind of inspired the conversation. It's actually something I had been thinking about prior to this, but recently Gone with the Wind was put on HBO Max, and with it, controversy.
What?
It actually goes a little bit further back than that, really. I think the first time I can think of this was old Looney Tunes in the box set that started with a disclaimer of some of this is racist. It was the time. Gone with the Wind, of course, inspired a whole slew of we should take it down, we shouldn't take it down, it's important, we should put up a disclaimer. And we thought, why don't we do this with everything? So we're going to kick it off with Gone with the Wind, a movie that came out on December 15th, 1939, adapted from a novel in 1936, which is a pretty fast turnaround time for an era that I'm pretty sure was all in black and white. It wasn't all in black and white still.
No, it wasn't, because Gone with the Wind is in color.
It is in very, very beautiful color, in fact.
Amazing, yeah. Still holds up pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, cinematically, it is a stunning piece, and I don't think we can ever take away the fact that it is very forward cinematically.
Yeah, I think one of the most important parts of this movie, especially in that time, was that it really was one of the most ambitious movies they had ever produced. The scale, the scope, adapting a beloved property. I didn't know this until today. The book is still considered the second favorite book by American readers, behind the Bible.
And that shows you so much about America. Thank you.
Because as somebody I went to Sunday school and I was religious for a while, I never in a million years would be like, the Bible, top 5. And if that's your thing, it's your thing. I always put it in a different category than Lord of the Rings.
Right. I think it's really telling what your favorite books are. I definitely, I try not to be judgmental, but I fail. So I will roll my eyes inside internally if certain books are your favorite.
Yeah. So that's a lot. There's just so much history with Gone with the Wind, even without the movie itself. Yeah. This giant search for Scarlett O'Hara. They interviewed 1,400 actresses and females.
This is actually the real historical moment was when they decided that people were actually female people too.
You have to distinguish it then.
Oh my god.
And it blew up. It was the highest grossing movie for 25 years. If you adjust it for inflation, it still is,
Yeah.
which just really shows you how I think movie going itself has changed. But what was your guys' first exposure to this movie? And did you like it when you saw it?
I was raised with Gone with Wind. That sounds very weird the way I just phrased that, but
I carried
I
around like my teddy bear. It
yes,
was
it
always with
was.
me.
I'm literally in a room where we have Scarlet and Scarlet like Gone with the Wind books on the shelf. So I my mom is from the South, and Gone with the Wind is one of her favorite movies. Um, I will say that she is able to see the problematic nature of it, but I was raised watching it from a very young age. And I think my first few exposures to it were that it is very long and that I really, really loved, Scarlett's dresses and that I loved Carol Burnett's take on her curtain dress. It was different experiencing it as an adult and processing my experiences as a woman of color, like seeing certain things. I was like, oh yeah, there's just stuff that you just can't defend. I mean, that's the best way to put it.
Yeah.
No matter how you feel about the movie, when you can't defend the content. And I think there's a lot of movies like that. And I think we live in a weird time now where a lot of people with a movie, a book, a comic, a video game, whatever it is like written. And they go, well, if you wrote it, that's your opinion.
Mhm.
Not realizing that like the same dude who wrote Batman also wrote the Joker, which are like two opposite characters. They don't have 30 people in a room with different opinions writing different lines down. So you can enjoy something. I look at almost a movie like Vice and be like, that was a really good movie. He is a horrible man.
Right.
And it's learning how to differentiate those two things and holding more than one thought in your head. Terrence, you like just recently saw this for the first time, right?
Yeah. 48 hours ago. Had never
How are you doing?
right? Have you recovered? I don't know what I do know why. Being a black male from Detroit, I didn't really have a reason to watch this. This wasn't one of those ones like there's a lot of movies that they show in your homeroom or your classroom, but because I think the length of this film, that just never happened or could happen. So I never got to watch this at school, and I definitely wasn't watching this at home. I was aware of the importance of the movie. Like I track the ratings. I know how well it done box office wise. I've seen some of the dresses. I knew Vivian Lee. I knew the lines, but I had never seen the film in its entirety. Because we were doing this, I was like, all right, cool. Finally get to crack this egg open, and I watched it. Immediately was like, wow, this is 3 hours and 50 minutes long. Jesus, I'm gonna be here a while. I had to break it up into chunks. But what was funny is that it actually didn't feel like I know it's 3 hours and 50 minutes, but I didn't feel like it. It flowed pretty seamlessly. Like I didn't feel like it dragged at any point in time. But as I was watching it and going through, I'm like, this is very melodramatic. Reminded me a lot of Titanic, as far as like being a romanticized version of something that took place in history. And I sat here, uh, correct, um, but and romanticize the horrific things. And that's where I was like, I was having some disconnect. I was like, oh, this is weird. They're making it seem like these black people are perfectly fine being here and being treated as the way they are. And that's where I was like, okay, something's off in the way that they're delivering this to the way that I'm receiving it or it's supposed to be received. And there were just moments that there's an entire moment where there are folks at a boatyard. It has nothing to do with the rest of the scene, but there are black people being said that they're going to get 40 acres and a mule. And I'm like, why is this here? Like, because this doesn't mean anything for the rest of this film. And we don't come back to this point other than just say, hey guys, we're not that bad. We're okay.
And that's the thing. That's the thing. I recently had to do a stage reading of. I didn't have to. I was in a stage reading of To Kill a Mockingbird, and the company didn't have any people of color, so I read all of the women of color roles, and I have never felt I literally had a really emotional response to it because I realized, yes, this is a great work of art. It's a great narrative, but it's a narrative that is not for me as a person of color. This is a narrative. This is a white narrative to talk about race, not involved with people of color. It's like you were invited to a dinner of all white people talking about race and you shouldn't be there. That's how it
Yeah.
feels. Yeah, I feel like the same a little bit goes with Gone with the Wind as like I don't think I should be invited to this dinner.
Correct. And it's a really weird thing because I don't. Yes, it is. It's racist, but I don't think it's blatantly racist. It does this weird thing where I think the problem is because it's trying to put a sheen on racism and the racist stuff that happens in the past, it becomes worse. So there's a lot of people in this country who, unfortunately, the history books don't teach you about slavery. They don't actively go out of their way, so they get their information from movies. If people were watching this as their representation of what happened back in the day, they're gonna be like, I don't understand why these black folks are that angry. It wasn't that bad.
Terrence, I'm glad you said that about it because my first exposure to this movie and my elementary school taught us slavery for almost the majority of our history class. And they weren't just like, here's how it went down. I don't know where they got these DVDs, but they were some of the most violent, bloody, horror. It might have been, I don't remember what it was anymore. I just remember going home and being like, I was like, Mom, there was a lot of blood on this guy's back today. And then at the end of all of this, they showed us Gone with the Wind. And I remember like half of our class who they've traumatized because they then were, which is weird because like they taught us Thanksgiving and we're like, sometimes the Pilgrims and Indians were friends. Here's slavery.
Just that one day, and then the white people completely wiped them out.
And then as if we were in some quantum leap for like awful things white people did, they'd be like, okay, now Thanksgiving is over and we did the slavery stuff. Now we'll show you what we really did to the Native Americans. And you're like, this is whiplash. But they showed us Gone with the Wind. And I remember half of my class raising their hands and being like, we're confused. You showed us all of this horrible stuff. And this movie, everyone kind of seems like chill about it. So what's up with that?
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's the major issue with it is it's from a Southern pride position, right? And not saying that you shouldn't have pride in where you're from, but I do think that it's problematic when we hear people say things like, well, they weren't treated that bad, or they were good to their slaves. Like statements like they were good to their slaves. That is a problematic statement because you're saying they were good to somebody that they bought, that had no freedom. It's completely and totally problematic. I literally wrote an article trying to find a woke founding father that had like the least amount of flaws that, and that was one of the difficulties was like, yeah, they were good to their slaves. Or Jefferson is known to have had a woman that was a slave. Like
they would have bear his children, and that's
right,
perfectly fine.
but that is not a complete, like, it's a glossed over. They didn't have the choice. The choices on the other side are completely different. And so I think that is the problem that's the overall problem of Gone with the Wind, is that it kind of gives credence to that kind of statement. And that's scary.
It's at the very end, I think, when they do the Emancipation Proclamation and everyone's like, we'll stay. Which is, I don't know, kind of like getting to break up with an abusive person and being like, though.
But I mean, some of that occurred because a lot of them just like, I don't know what to do next, so this is where I'm staying, I guess. And that happened.
Okay, I did not know that. I tried to find that before we recorded and I couldn't. So great.
Well, yeah, a lot of slaves didn't. Where are they going to go? I mean, they're
uneducated.
Arrangement.
They can't read, so there's a lot of stuff that they just wouldn't. It would be like taking a baby bird and just like, you're born, go.
Yeah.
And I'm not teaching you anything, and that's kind of that situation was. So a lot of them were just like, this is what I know.
Yeah.
I'm going to just stay here.
The arrangement maybe changed a little bit. You had like sharecroppers, and you
Correct.
like legally why the whole thing with watermelon and black people is because that was one of the only crops that black people were like legally allowed to like profit from. So while they're sharecropping your farm, they're also cooking, like, they're planting watermelon to actually make money. Like that's just like,
Yeah.
they didn't have a lot of choices. There wasn't that many choices. And also the world was like, just because they were freed as slaves doesn't mean the world was kind. The kind of world that we're stepping
there wasn't
into.
an automatic switch that went
Yeah.
from, all right, well then we'll accept them now, and
The
like,
switch
cool.
hasn't even been switched now very
Yeah.
well.
Which is also a part of this film and this whole process, is that like we see the performances or the portrayals of the African American. Prissy, my eyes rolled every time Prissy spoke on screen, and I know that was may have been but God, that was hard to watch. I was like, you guys made her seem like she might be the most unintelligent person on the face of the planet.
It's written that way in the book too.
Yeah,
when you read it, it's like it's the kind of things that I hope at least most people today, when they look at, are like, why did we ever even do this?
Yeah.
Well,
Like
see, I had more of a problem with like the mammy figure, right? To me, like she was probably, I mean, this woman raised Scarlett, and we see elements of that kind of like, but this is like basically her mom, you know, like this is the
more
person,
so than her actual. Yes, correct.
yeah. And so I think making her a caricature of, you know, like this mammy is the worst part, one of the worst portrayals in there. Prissy to me is complicated because they did make her an idiot, but if she was an idiot like that in that whole situation when the baby was being born, I'm sorry, I don't care if you were white, black, whatever, I probably would have slapped you too. And I I understand that her character is written very poorly, and I'm not sure why they chose to make her that way. Yeah, that aggressively that way. But that is probably the only moment I was like, yeah, I don't care what you were, I would probably have a problem with that action. Like,
yeah.
But yeah, I agree that she is a problematic character.
It's interesting with Mammy and Hattie McDaniel, because I'm also in the same boat. I think it's a very, very overt caricature of a stereotypical black mom who's black mom, black aunt, black whomever matriarch who's taking care of white people. But when I looked into it, it's a weird thing. Hattie was okay with that. Like she knew what she was doing. Like she only played nurses and maids and all of that type of stuff. So she even had a line of what did I read? And I was like, wait, what? How was that even possible? But she said she would rather, because that's all she played was maids for the most part. And she said she would rather play a maid than be one. And so she was okay as long as she was working. But the active problem with that is that on the flip side, she won an award for this and couldn't even sit with the rest of her cast members. She had to be on an offside table. So I'm like,
right. She wasn't even allowed in the ballroom.
They had to bring her through the back door to come into the
to get her award. But
right.
I will say, like, what choice did she have? She wanted to work.
Exactly. Right.
Right.
At that point in time, that's the only roles that were being given were like you have to play a maid. So I get where she's coming from as far as like, I'm okay with this because I don't have another choice. But that just shows you the world that we lived in, that's all that you could offer to a person of color at that point in time. And then even if you do a great job and succeed at that character, we're going to give you a reward by bringing you through the cooks in the kitchen line because you can't come in through the front door.
So that brings us kind of to another question I have, because the biggest why can't we do this anymore is the revisionist history, to kind of use that term, and to also sort of paint slavery from the point of view of the owners and the Southern, there's a word for that kind of writing, Southern plantation fiction or something like that. It's like a genre of just weird, problematic. I'm sure some of it's good with air quotes, but is there anything else in the movie? And don't get me wrong, what we talked about is hugely why you can't do it. The Scarlett O'Hara character, is there anything problematic with her and the coming of age aspects of the movie and the relationships, or had we maybe handled that one element better, would like the character of Scarlet and everything else endeared.
You know, there are different iterations of the same story because it is such a popular story. And there is actually one called The Wind and Gone, which is from the slave perspective. And it's interesting because I feel like in Gone with the Wind, you think Scarlet is like this fluffy, like brat that just learns how to be scrappy and in the end and stuff like that. And I think The Wind and Gone is really interesting because it kind of throws reasons into that, like Scarlet's supposed to be part black in it, and there's a little bit more, you know, reason for her to be scared and desperate to get a man and get out, you know, like there's a lot of different elements. I don't think that this kind of film really highlighted her as a good person. Like I think it was like a flighty, weird
Yeah.
I mean that's a portrayal of women too, right? So if you're strong, if you are, then you're a brat, you're a bitch, you're a this, right? You can't be a strong, sensitive woman, you know?
I definitely felt that throughout the movie. I thought they were trying, like, I thought for that point in time that was a strong female character, but when I look at it from top to bottom, I was like, oh, this is what we thought women were, to be either weak, preyed upon type of women. Where, I mean, this guy's looking at us at the beginning of this film, she's a 16-year-old girl, and
Yeah.
you're like, oh, this is bizarre that he's basically grooming her, or she's being groomed to him. Either way, that both sides of that coin are wrong. But then you eventually get her to a point where she does become this flighty person, where she pines over her sister's guy for half the freaking film, and then you're like, wait, what is happening?
Who is her cousin?
Yeah, yes, that's an entirely yes.
But that is a whole nother thing that
Right.
we can't go into. There is something interesting that came to light because my mom is very into this movie, as I've said. I did not know that Clark Gable was part black, and that one of the reasons they even got the small bit of humanity that we got in the African American characters, and that they even got even treated a fraction of better, was because he was passing and he was looking out for the African Americans on set. I don't know what that means exactly and how much that could have affected anything really, but I think it maybe gave them a fraction more care on set. I don't know. I think if we just look at this film, like, it is cinematically beautiful, cinematically ahead of its time. It is beautiful. It's stunning. It is dramatic.
Sweeping
think-
shots,
Yeah,
gorgeous.
beautiful.
I mean, yeah, you can't, like, I say this a lot with movies that sometimes have bland stories, like even Avatar. I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
well, it's not that good of a movie, but like, look
so
at what
pretty.
they did.
Yeah, it's a
Like,
gorgeous shot.
like that.
Especially back
that's-
then, there's some pull away shots that, like, when all the bodies are, when she goes to go get the doctor, and all the bodies are just laid out after the war. And I was like, oh, this was shot in when? Because this looks fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's part of the reason it was so successful, right? Is you had a known IP with the book. It was
Mhm.
met with applause when they secretly screamed it on the Fox lot, and then it blew up and it took off. And part of that is for the same reason a lot of things still are successful. We have a whole podcast about known IPs taking off, but the reality is when a movie is so technically proficient that it pushes the filmmaking process, which is very different than the storytelling process,
Mhm.
forward, people go. They'll do it in every industry. If you're pushing something ahead, people notice. Whenever we have changes in technology, music, or anything like that, we go, what is this? And look, it was the 30s. So some people, right? Some of the reviews weren't great. And they were, to Terrence's earlier point of, why was this here? If only just to be like, look, they're not that bad. And did we
Right.
really need to watch her go through all of these marriages? Like, this really have to be Snyder cut length of a movie? Like,
Yeah.
we could now make this a mini
I mean,
series.
they put everything in the kitchen sink thinking there. I'm like, oh,
But
just
they
to the
didn't
point.
have like that was not the format of film
Correct.
back then. I will say like I would just be happy if they had a disclaimer before that was like this is a very heavily like southern white narrative, you
Well,
know.
I think that's what the compromise to say, I guess, on HBO Max was we won't take it off, but we'll put a like, hey, warning may
Yeah, there's
contain like a Surgeon General's warning of political correctness,
correct.
if you
There's
will.
a 3-minute button at the beginning of it that they kind of go into the troubles with Hattie McDaniel and all that stuff. So yeah,
So
it's there.
to then go for that kind of last segment of the show, I guess, is can we still have this movie or did it do anything important? I know there are some people who think, and I didn't really think about this too much, so maybe you guys can shine more light on it, but there are those who thought that it pushed the roles and the way African Americans were portrayed in Hollywood further ahead. That without this movie, we would have been like backwards a few more years, if only for maybe the winning of the awards.
I say the award winning is where that may come in. I don't think the caricature or the representation of any of the African Americans on scene in the movie does that, but I do think the acknowledgement that they did a portrayal did sort of move that along. My only issue with that is that until probably recently, the only time that they would give us awards would be if we were playing a slave or a maid or some type of subservient type of
Mhm.
character. When we play a doctor or any of that type of stuff, that wouldn't really get the thing. So that's where I have a yes, it gives us the ability to like, oh, we're getting more clout, but the problem is that they're giving more clout in the way that they want us to be seen as opposed to the way that we are.
I think that yeah, I think this was the common narrative, and I don't think it pushed any different narrative forward. I will say that the movie's here. There's nothing you can do about it. It has affected filmmaking. It has affected everything. You can't take it back. But what you can do is, um, I think, what is important is that every single slave movie that we see now um, should take notes and to like how one-sided the narrative has been. It's either torturous porn or it's glorified southern pride, and they're somewhere in between. And I think that has to do with a lot of just like segregated crew and cat, and like I think that that has to do with like not having everybody in the room, not having everybody have a seat at the table, that the narrative hasn't reflected both sides of this discussion.
Yeah, like in the front offices or the people making the decisions with
Yeah,
things needs to be a little bit more mixed than
correct. Yeah.
what we know is actually
Because
happening.
I've read certain like there was a book I read recently, The Water Dancer. And it is a slave book. It's a book about a slave, and it sucks. Like it's obviously slavery sucks, but there's a supernatural element. It's written by a black man. Um and the narrative is a little bit more less torture porn to me, and less southern pride, but it's complicated, and it shows so many different layers of the feelings that this man was going through. Yeah, and I think it shows the narrative shows based on who's writing it. It really just does. And I think sometimes it's just not your story to tell. And
Mhm.
So
slavery is
then,
really not a white story to tell.
no.
I mean, it's one of the problems I had with I love Lovecraft Country. Like I love the book, but I also do go, you're a white man. And in some corners of that book, I can go, I can kind of tell. And now with with the TV show, I can tell that they have black people writing the episodes. Like I can understand. So it's just
There's a
representation
feel
is
to it, like
yeah.
when there's an
So
authenticity
then,
to it.
this is a tough question, and
Okay.
I'm curious what we all think about it because there are all of these southern plantation stories. We do even in this movie have like a white characters. So there are white stories in that time.
Right.
How would a white writer or a white director go about going, I want to use this as a backdrop and do this type of story? Should we just stay away from that time entirely?
I mean, I'm not saying you should stay away from it entirely. I don't I I don't know how much obsession that we need to have with it from a white perspective. I think that's a little bit I don't even know how to put it in words. I think it's a little self indulgent or something. It's something, just something about like this weird power struggle of keep on telling this story of I'm this great white savior to all these like uh yeah, so I'm not sure how many more stories we can tell from that perspective that are going to be that interesting. But if you do write something like that, I would say, please have like somebody in your life that is Black that can maybe look at the characters that are Black in that and feel represented and ask them and don't I think this is in general in anything that you're writing that is not your culture and that is not your experience, do your research and hand it to somebody that is of that culture or that experience and say, how do you feel? Does this feel real to you? Like, I
Yeah.
think you have to be able to know that you don't know it all and you don't know that experience and go, I'd really like your input. And I think that's just in general, you know? I don't know how to be a man and I write men all the time, but I like to hand it to men and go, does that sound like something you would do? You know, like, does this what it feels like to have a penis? Is it? I don't know. Okay, good.
Where I have it's funny because I do think it's a weird thing. I don't think slave movies should stop, but I also don't know if we should still be making them. They exist. I think we have enough great slave stories or good to great slave stories that have already been created that we don't need to keep going back to the well on it, because I also think that's a mental handicap that you keep trying to make us stay in that thing. So like, this is where you guys came from. We're going to keep reminding you that so you guys don't grow out of that. That's where I get a little messy with.
And that's the narrative that I
films.
feel like is too much. Like,
Yeah.
Tell another narrative.
So that's why I would like to see other stories being told, but I don't think we should I think those movies exist. I think people should still see roots. I think those type of movies should still be a part of the culture and should be shown, because I don't think ignoring that, if we do, we're going to end up kind of repeating steps. And I think that's where we get dangerous. So they should see all of that type of stuff. I just don't know if we need to still be making that anymore, because we're not, or if we are, to Anastasia's point, and you are someone who was not of color making those, make sure you damn well have people of color on there to make sure that you're doing this and telling the story in an accurate way.
Right. And I agree with both of you. And I want to be clear that I wasn't being like, but what about the white person then?
Oh no,
No,
you're
no.
asking the
No.
questions
Yeah.
because these are the questions that this is not his view. He is asking the
Right.
questions. But no, but I do think that there are stories to be told. I just think that this great white warrior story is done. I think that we need to see the slave stories. I think we need to see the biracial stories. I think we need to see all these different layers. I think we need to see the different layers of these experiences from different sides. I think that we've seen a certain narrative a lot.
Yeah, and I think, I think Gone with the Wind is a movie that still has not necessarily relevance today, but enough historical relevance that if you are a film buff or a film student or a creative, it's good knowing, and it's good knowing the context around it, because I think, and I said this right before we started recording, I actually think the story around the movie is way more interesting than the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean the fact that they like built these elaborate, I mean, it is something that everybody that is into cinema should see. It is something that people should see just historically, like it is, but I think there should be a conversation. That's all.
Yeah.
I don't believe in banning things in general. I think that just conversations need to be had, disclaimers need to be had. That's all I feel.
I agree. I think there's a weird thing that this, especially this country, likes to do, is just like, hey, this causes a problem for other people, just get rid of it.
Right.
Instead of the better thing is to let's talk about it, let's have a conversation about it,
And let's change
right?
it in
And
the future. Like I
Right.
feel like when we just sweep it under the rug and we get rid of it, who is learning and who's changing their cinema for the future? Nobody.
Yeah, then we're just going to keep doing, I mean, we're already doing the same movies, but we'll just keep making the same mistakes in them if we don't take the time to go, oh, I get it. That was a problem.
And wouldn't it be nice if we learned and changed?
No, you see, I'm 31 and I've got it. I've
got it
played
all figured out.
Pokemon. There was the child one, the middle one, and the adult one, and then the Pokemon stopped evolving.
Well, I'm trying to introduce a new evolution. It's called woke phase.
You're telling me there's going to be a fourth Charizard that just has like small rimmed glasses and is like, hold on, this is animal fighting. We shouldn't be doing this at all.
Oh, well, he sounds like not a lot of fun at all. Nah.
No,
he's just like, don't be a dick.
He comes out of the Pokeball, the tournament is just like, are you going to call me by my name? You know, Charizard is the species name.
I am a person.
Glenn. You're going to call me Glenn. And you're going to say, please, to use flamethrower. Okay? We talked about this. Communication. Then he turns around and he wins.
Exactly. But he didn't win for you. He won for himself.
No, he takes the badges on his own. You get nothing.
Just ruined Pokemon for everyone.
Look, I'll do that episode. I love Pokemon and I will defend it.
I have the perfect guest for that episode. I will tell you.
Michael Vick's autobiography, but it's great.
Oh no! I think that's when we end.
I think that's the show. That's the pilot. We did it. We almost made it the entire time without going into a weird off tangent, which is better than a lot of podcasts that don't even hit their topic for hours. Take that, other off-topic people. Of course, you can find us across pretty much every social media, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, at Can't Do That Pod. You can email us at can'tdothatpod@gmail.com. Again, I'm at As Always Blake. Terrence and I do another show called Hollywood Already Did It about movie reboots and remakes. There's a great Pokemon episode in there. I also do another show called How Do You Figure? Terrence is at Terrence Tatum, and he also does the YouTube spinoff of Hollywood Already Did It, where we cover all the things we didn't do. I think a lot of stuff went up as of the day of this recording about DC fandom. You can find Anastasia at Anastasia W, and her comedy shows are all in her bios there for her stand-up. She also is on One More Drink. All three of us are, with two other hosts. And she does hysterical and serial killer podcasts, and you can find those at all podcast stores, which of course are digital and not brick and mortar.
Not yet. I'm really trying to bring Blockbuster back in a podcast way.
I'm just going to keep making the Tower Records joke until someone tweets me and is like, please stop making podcasts at Tower Records jokes. They haven't yet. So that's where you can find us.
Anastasia goes on Twitter.
Can't be a host of the show. I think it's funnier when you're annoyed by it. All right, we will see you guys next week. This has just been the three of us, but all of our episodes going forward will have a guest bringing their own POV, because while we are a diverse group of people, there are, of course, hundreds of others' points of views and different people than us, and we hope you enjoyed listening. Did I tell them to leave us a review on iTunes? You should leave us a review on iTunes, and we will see you all later.
Bye.